Lecture 11, Chapter 3. Author spends a lot of time describing the first attempt, the modern attempt by the brown people who occupied in concentrations across the southwest territory of what we know the United States, which includes Texas through California, all that territory. Of course, we also have large settlements, concentrated settlements in the Chicago area outside of Los Angeles, California. Point being is that the master narrative that's trying to be recreated has multiple purposes, but the one what we're focusing on here is unity, the common thread that unites people within a historical context. So all those fragments that were discussed with Vigil in the last 5 weeks, 6 weeks, well, now we're trying, the master narrative that's trying to be recreated is trying to give cohesiveness and challenge the immigrant master narrative, which the Mexicano, Chicano, brown people of the United States are experiencing, where they feel like they're the eternal immigrants, no matter how many generations they've settled in. Despite the fact that, as I've stated before, the Chicano people have been here permanently. Okay, the word to describe them is modern. Just like language evolves, people evolve, societies evolve. Okay, so everything else is in movement. Okay, the master narrative regarding the chapter 3, he focuses on the origin story of the Aztecs, Aztlan. And here he looks at the evidence, and the evidence is weak. The evidence is scattered. People who have attempted to locate Aztlan. So there's this mythical aspect that begins to take hold in Mexico, former, right, the Republic of Mexico, where it's not a really, it's part of the story, but it's definitely not the focal. Well, here in the United States, the Chicano people are like focusing on it. So this is the first time they're trying to focus on it to recreate a narrative. I don't want to call it a competitive narrative, but obviously it turns out like that, right? Because it becomes a contra narrative, because the author calls the maize narrative, corn narrative, a contra narrative. Well, the Aztlan maps in this chapter are an attempt at a contra narrative starting in the late 1960s and throughout the 70s. It petered out towards the end of the 70s, and because the United States, at least the master narrative, is seeing how this Aztlan narrative is starting to kind of bring people together, and they're starting to organize, and they're starting to go in the streets and demand justice and equity. Well, then they insert they begin to introduce the words like Hispanic into the mainstream consciousness, and so they actually neutralize that. But the author is also not necessarily agreeing. He's just recognizing that it was the beginning of attempting to create a contra-narrative. And the Aztlan narrative is that one. The issue is that it's not a strong one. Not strong enough because it's tied more to myth than to concrete reality. The United States has a myth, but that myth is tied to material realities we can see, feel. What are those two? Primarily the most popular ones. One is called the United States Constitution. The other one's called the Declaration of Independence. So even if democracy is not fully put into practice, I mean, after all, not less than 50% of us ever go out to vote. Secondly, gerrymandering, a perfect example of how democracy works against people of color, particularly historically. I mean, gerrymandering started in New York, which was basically a competition for redrawing districts to concentrate certain votes to vote certain parties in, and so it targeted just people you didn't want to sit around in the table to make policy. Well, that was spread across regions where minority voters were concentrated across the South for African Americans, and across the Southwest in the United Southwest here in the Chicano, where Chicanos lived. All right, so again, the author's arguing, well, see, if Aztlán is too mythical and we can't find it, we can't pinpoint it, we can't create a, let's call it a holy site of the origin of the Chicano people, the Mexica people, the Aztec people, because see, in Mexico, that's their narrative, a glorious Aztec past, and then the birth of a mestizo nation. That's their master narrative, okay? And that's why everybody who's Mexican is mestizo, even though maybe like grandma still speaks the native language, okay? So the mestizo word itself is just a creation of sorts, and it's tied to a genetic basis. Well, culture, it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work in black and white. Culture is a social tool that humans use to navigate their social world between each other and outsiders up to that culture. All right, here we go. So he again argues the maize story is the most powerful one, because you eat and feel and are in touch with maize, and it's like I stated in an earlier lecture. It is the gift that keeps on giving. Okay, and so he's and it's an old story, like similar to the competing master narrative of Christianity. Christianity is only about 2,000 years old. Judaism is another 1,000 years older than that. But maize is 9,000 years old, and maize creates humans in the context of culture and stories, and it can be touched and feel. It has it's grounded in reality, but it also has those important components of a master narrative, which is the mythical aspect of it, the reverence of it, the cultural message that it carries. So that's chapter 3, which is basically the deconstruction of the attempts at building a homeland, a mythical homeland called Aztlán. But at the end of the day, maize takes the day, because maize is what connects not only brown people of Mexican descent or attached culturally to Mexico, but also it puts you into contact with people all over the Americas, and hence begins to help you understand that you are not an immigrant in your own territory, in your own continent, and that your distant cousin from the eastern U.S. coast is your distant cousin, and I was just thinking about the people in Chile. Oh, the Mapuche. The Mapuche people are your distant cousins. So anywhere you go, you're visiting family. Thank you.